Good evening and welcome back. It's good to see everyone here this evening. For those of you who I haven't seen already today, some of you have seen for most of the day, I'm Dr. Kendra Clayton, President of the Graduate Theological Foundation, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here tonight to the 2018 Lord Robert Runcie Convocation Lecture. As President of the GTF, I have the honor and privilege of working with an amazing group of people. I'm inspired by the dedication and commitment to academic excellence embodied by our faculty. The GTF exists because of them. I'd like to ask all members of the GTF faculty to stand, please. We have some members who were not here earlier today. Thank you. In the spring of 2000, following the death of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Robert Runcie, the Graduate Theological Foundation established the Lord Robert Runcie Convocation Lecture Series in honor and recognition of the loyalty and support he showed as the head of the Church of England to the Graduate Theological Foundation's work in ministry education. The 2018 Lord Runcie Lecturer is a member of the faculty of the Graduate Theological Foundation with a long history of commitment to the mission of this institution. He has a robust background in pastoral care and counseling, including serving as a Red Cross disaster chaplain during the 9/11 World Trade Center disaster in New York City. He is a board-certified clinical chaplain and pastoral counselor, and the author of many books and articles on the subject. It is my great honor to introduce to you this evening Dr. Muhammad Hatim, the Imam Warith Dean Muhammad Professor of African American Muslim Studies. Dr.
Assalamu alaikum. Greetings. This lecture comes about from the experience that I had in preparing two books that I have here. Later, if people want to see them. The first one is called Caregiving to Muslims. It's a guide for clinicians, social workers, counselors, or people who are just interested in Muslim caregiving. After that, if you're a counselor or a psychiatrist or medical doctor, and you have, in the first book, understood the relationship between the Koran, some of the traditions of Islam, and the psychological theory, maybe of Franco or Jung, because some of that is addressed in the first book, then what you may need is a resource that talks about, in the Koran itself, what does the Koran have to say about patience, justice, anxiety? And the second book, which is called Quranic Comfort and Joy, Healing in Contemporary Times, will be of some use. So from that, being the Imam Warith Dean Muhammad Professor of African American Muslim Studies here at the Foundation, I expanded it to the discussion of the African American Muslim community in particular. So some of the presentation today comes from the experience from the community itself. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. It's my intention to offer some suggestions and strategies for the individual and collective wellness. And the focus here is on wellness. Yes, I'm focusing on the African American Muslim community, but there are some larger issues that can be more universal in your own particular tradition. The work is a broader implication for the entire American Ummah meaning all of the various Muslim communities in the United States. Notwithstanding, I observed some of the historical and tribal ethnic challenges, real or imaginary, how they appear to stand in the way of the overall Muslim wellness and community, and I'll talk more about some of our internal discussion a little bit later. Of course, it is not my objective to debate theology, tafsir, which is the Arabic word for hermeneutics, or psychological principles. And the comments are based on my own clinical pastoral training and my experience as well as observations. And of course, any benefit that you get from the presentation is because of the Creator, Allah. Any errors that you identify are my own. The overall summary of what I want to accomplish, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time as I go throughout the presentation on all of these. Some I'll spend more than others, but just to know what the overall shape of the discussion is. Missed opportunities for Islamic care, and that's from our own Muslim community. Things that I see that we are missing and we need to address in some manner, or clinical manner or another. Authentic clinical pastoral education and training. It's not my intention to beat up on ACPE or CSP, College of Pastoral Supervision Psychotherapists, or any of the accrediting agencies. However, there have been some situations where imams and the Muslim women who were taking some of the training have run into some errors, blocks. We want to talk a little about that because we need somehow to address that in our own community as well with the accrediting agencies. Self-affirmation, self-determination, and self-development. These are the kinds of discussions that need to take place in individual communions, in the individual traditions among the Muslims. My concept is tribal. I think people are tribal. Whatever country you come from, I think that for the most part, in Africa, of course, we know that there are very, very many people who belong to various tribes. In the Middle East, there are people who are also tribal. In the United States, we have Native Americans that are tribal. Truth be known, that when the Europeans come in their own country, they are tribal. When they get here, they want to form some national more allegiance with the Irish or the Italians. But go to Italy, go to Germany, and you understand really how tribal they really are. So we don't want to overlook that. In terms of national development, what that means, you have family, you have clans, groups of families. You have tribes, which are different clans that come together to form a tribal nation. So that's the concept I want to deal with in this discussion. African American Muslims in Islam. The African American Muslims claim the heritage of the original Africans who were Muslim, who were enslaved in the United States. Yes, some of that tradition was lost, some of it was kept. You'll find in places like Savannah, Georgia, in the museums, you'll find even people who were writing, Muslims who were writing, African Muslims who were here, writing in Arabic as scholars. The discussion usually is that the Africans who came were illiterate. There were some who were. They may not have a written language, but they still had their own way of communicating. But the Muslims who were African, who were brought into the United States, many of them could write, at least the Arabic. So there are examples in museums, in the South in particular, of writings of African Muslims who were here. There are portraits of the African Muslims who were here. There are discussions written by some of the Europeans of actually seeing the Muslims praying in the streets or fasting during the month of Ramadan. So my point is that many of us who are African American Muslims are claiming that African heritage, claiming that as part of the reason for embracing or evolving into the religion of Islam. I'll talk a little bit about the pastoral care and the future of the DSM-5 text revised. The DSM-5 is new. The new edition is from 2013. They usually revise it every 20 years. But every 10 years, they come out with a TR, text revised. I have some notion that I'll discuss in terms of this thing, in my mind, I'm calling it a terroristic personality disorder, which with all the questions of terrorism around the world, I'm now thinking that the psychological people, the psychiatrists in particular, will want to come up with a personality disorder that will be called, in my mind, a terroristic personality disorder. Now, if that's the case, then the Muslim community should be advised that they should begin to look at the DSM-5 especially the area under cultural formation, to see how that may or may not affect the Muslim community by the time the DSM-5 is revised in 10 years and when the new edition comes out in 20 years. Now, maybe I'm just a little alerted, maybe I'm a little jaded because of the kinds of work that I do. However, I think it's something that the Muslim community should begin to discuss at least, and to come up with its own discussion. And I think a brother talked earlier about the definition of terrorism. I think that the Muslim need to decide their own definition of what is terroristic, given the context of the Koran and the Hadith and the traditions, and also given the political situation that exists. And I'm not saying that this should be an apology for human behavior that you have no control over. I'm saying that there should be an intellectual discussion on, from our perspective, a Muslim perspective, on what those things may cover. Outcomes, I'm projecting outcomes that you may get from this presentation and that Muslims, I believe, get when we make the presentation in various places. A comprehensive understanding of Muslim wellness. What does it mean to be well in America, 2018, as a Muslim? Given the kinds of things that happened after 9/11, for us who live in the New York City metropolitan area, and the kinds of tension, stress that may or may not be felt by the particular Muslim at the time. Case in point, I ride the subways in New York all the time. However, I will not go to the edge of the subway platform because there are the possibility that someone might just see this and decide, for whatever reason, their own behavioral health, that they want to push me on the tracks. Now, maybe that sounds a little paranoid, perhaps, and maybe it is, or it's cautious, or dealing with the reality of being a Muslim in 2018. My metaphor, the kind of work I do daily is working in alcohol and drug facility. My patients have substance use disorder, mental health issues, and are HIV positive. They have all three, it's not one or the other. Each patient has all of these. So in dealing with them on a daily basis, you never know who's going to show up in an encounter, or the kinds of trauma, tragedy, anxiety that the person may have. So my metaphor for the Muslim and how the Muslim imam, Muslim practitioner needs to deal with the issues in our community, and I'm saying this because of the percentage of Muslims that I have as clients is about 20 to 30%. 20 to 30%. I know that there's some Muslims who say, no, we don't have that issue, alcohol, substance abuse, domestic violence. We don't have that in our community. However, the reality is, in my practice, 20 to 30% of the Muslims are HIV positive, have mental health issues, and substance use disorder. So again, my metaphor is as I'm walking to the masjid for prayer, how can I, as a Muslim, walk over the bodies, metaphorical bodies, images of my brothers and my sisters? Oh, I heard the adhan, it's time to go to prayer for Jummah prayer. Oh, I heard the adhan, it's time to make the afternoon prayer. How can I go without asking myself on Yom Kippur, the day of judgment, what will Allah say to me? Oh, so I see you went to Jummah. Did you not see your brother who was suffering? Did you not see your sister who asked you for a dime or a dollar and you walked over them to get to the masjid? So it's a personal decision, and Allah's the best knower about the judgment of people. But these are the kinds of things that I'm dealing with because of, in part, because of my patients and my clientele. There's a Negro spiritual that says, I'm on the battlefield for my Lord. Any people, any Christians here know that one? I'm on the battlefield for my Lord. So it's there. So it helps me with my heritage now. I'm drawing on my African American heritage. It helps me with the metaphor to help me get through the issues. I understand my responsibility as an imam, as a leader in the community, to be on the battlefield working against these conditions for my Lord. Part of the denial that I face sometimes in the New York metropolitan area has to do with the community not really addressing some of the issues that I just pointed out. And I'm not really trying to beat up on the imams, because many of them, as you know, as ministers, you have a job, you have a family, you have responsibilities, car notes, house notes. In addition to whatever work you're doing in your church, your synagogue, or in the mosque. So I'm not really beating up on the caregiver. But what I am suggesting is that with all of that, there needs to be an opportunity to, if you can't do it by yourself, to reach out for support from those agencies and other people, counselors in your own communities. You can reach out to support for them to help you on your journey. We're not expected to do it all by yourself. Nobody does anything all by themselves. But, however, it's time to be able to understand the issues in the community and to know when to seek a referral or send someone for a referral for the proper health issues that they have, whether they're medical or psychological. For instance, it's interesting that the Ramadan is coming up pretty soon in the next couple of weeks. However, 2 years ago, there was an incident where a high school person, this young lady, Omotayo Adeoye, was taking a test. She'd already had conditional acceptance to Harvard and Yale. All she had to do was finish this last test and get those scores and have them submitted so she could have a full scholarship. The proctor where the test was being taken told everybody to put away their phones. So nobody could really say what really happened. She delayed in putting away the phone. Or she said, I forgot to turn my phone off. However, she reached for the phone and had it in her hands. The proctor said, you're cheating, tore up the test, and said, you have to go. Well, I can't go. Don't you know? Don't you know that I need this for my scholarship? Don't you know I cannot go home to my family and tell them? Don't you know they're already planning the party? The tickets are already purchased for me to go off to college? So this young lady decided to walk from the City University school, where she was a student, across Manhattan and walk into the Hudson River. Walk into the Hudson River to drown herself. So it raises the question, was there no auntie, Titi, no one that she could call on at that moment in crisis? Was there an imam that she could call? A pastor that she knew in the neighborhood? Someone that she could reach out to? This pains me, because this young lady, perhaps if she had somebody she could talk to at that moment in crisis, somebody in pastoral care training, might not have decided to walk into the Hudson River. Okay. So what happened? I'm working very closely with the Nigerian community in the Bronx in New York. So when this happened and they told me, I called some of the people together. I said, we need to talk about this, process this right now with the people we have here. We did a little bit. So I said, okay, now we need to reach out to the younger people, because what may happen is copycat. Someone else may be feeling those same kinds of issues and now decide, That's the easy way out. I'll go kill myself. So when I approached the imams in the council for setting up a time to do this, oh brother, you know the Ramadan is coming soon. Can we postpone this until after the Ramadan? No. We need to process this now. Oh, you know, okay. So it didn't happen. After the Ramadan, it still didn't happen. And it still has not happened. Although, a couple weeks ago, one of the leaders in the community came to me and said, you know, we really are still feeling the death of our sister, and we should talk about it. So, inshallah, there's a possibility they may decide to talk about it. Quickly, there was another example of a female judge. You may have read it in the New York Times. Whether she killed herself or was killed, kind of thing. The issue is that, well, the press and the police believe that she actually committed suicide. And this pains me the most, that in Brooklyn, in the Bay Ridge community, over the last 3 years, there have been 25, that was the last count about 6 months ago, there have been 25 young people who have overdosed on prescribed medications. To their credit, the community in some ways trying to address these issues, but from my perspective, too little too late, and not the passion and the compassion that I think that I feel for this. Again, a third of my patients. On a positive note, there are some communities in the Bronx are working again with a couple particular masjids that have got it. They've got it, and they're addressing the needs of the people. Also, this one in Brooklyn, the Imam Siraj Wahaj. We've been able to meet with hospital officials in the area to bring healthcare professionals into the masjid and to develop relationships between the masjid and those and particular healthcare professionals. We've incorporated a clinical approach to family and medical pastoral counseling, identified masjid specialists in substance abuse. They have identified a person who's in recovery in that particular community who now is bringing together young people to talk about the issue. Those who are in active addiction, to put them in, to make sure they get the counseling that they need, and those who are in recovery to join in recovery groups. Community health, hospital fairs, presentation to staff on Islamic compassionate care and counseling, which is one of the ways that I'm reforming the concept of pastoral care. Pastoral care is sometimes not really accepted as that language in the Islamic community, but we do understand Islamic compassionate care because Allah is Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, most compassionate. And a few other things. The safe space, that's not right. The safe space thing is very important. Youth, a safe space for meetings and events and activities. And we've had this talk, real talk they're calling the group, the young people. We're losing many of our young people, not just in the Muslim community, because the communities, the religious communities are not really addressing their needs. So my suggestion, and it's been taken up by some of the masajids, is to provide a safe space. Safe space means that the young people can come and have their own discussion on whatever those issues are that are affecting them in your community. We want it facilitated by whoever you decide in your community, who will maintain a certain amount of confidentiality. Of course, if there's abuse or suicide kinds of issues, that's out the window. However, just general conversation with them and being able to make a referral either to the imam or to negotiate with the parents some kind of discussion if the child is not able or willing to have that discussion. You can have someone who can not mediate, but facilitate a discussion. And I'm advising every church, every mosque, every synagogue to have this safe space where the young people can talk among themselves. complex issues that surfaced from these meetings. One is, again, firsthand testimony of people with suicidal ideation, firsthand testimony of Muslims who are in recovery, the safe space, again, mental health. In New York City, we have this mental health first aid, and it's a national program. I'm recommending that in your community you find where the training is being offered. It's usually free training, and it's an 8-hour course, mental health first aid. You're not a clinician necessarily, but a person who, if you identify certain traits, you can approach the person and ask them, well, I see that you're having some challenges, or can I help you? You seem to be a little distressed, or is there something I can do for you? Just to be able to identify the signs and symptoms. It's called mental health first aid. And in New York City, the movement is being pushed by, or forwarded by the First Lady, Charlene, what's her last name? McCray, Charlene McCray, in New York City, under the mayor's office in New York City Thrive. That's how they're calling it. New York City Thrive, and they're offering the training in mental health first aid. So I'm advising all the communities that are interested to seek that out in your own communities. Some of the challenges for the imams and other Muslims who have taken clinical pastoral education have been the pushback that they're getting when they're sitting in the groups with the Christians primarily, and sometimes with the Jews, but primarily with Christians. Because the Christian community is so diverse, the Episcopalians, Protestant, Catholics, the Church of God in Christ, some charismatic people, when they're in a group with people who are not Christian, even the Christians themselves have some issues. What baptism is right, you just got sprinkled, so you're not really saved, those kinds of issues. But so when the Muslim comes in, or someone from another religion, into the CPE circle, things can really get out of control sometimes. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding, and sometimes it's just plain arrogance. It's just plain arrogance under the guise of ecumenism. It's not working in many instances. So we've had imams who have been a part of CPE programs who've dropped out. They come to me and say, Dr. Muhammad, I don't know how you do it. I didn't know how you did it. How could you stand in the group when they have that arrogance, they have that attitude? They don't let me say what I need to say from an Islamic perspective. They try to shut me down. Or they have body language that's so offensive, so offensive. So I won't give you more examples on that, just to know that there are certain challenges. So I've approached some of the leadership in CPSP or ACPE, Association of Clinical Pastoral Educators, the healthcare chaplaincy, about some of the attitudes. Let's just say we haven't really got what I call an authentic response. So I'm asking the Islamic community to establish perhaps its own national certifying body for CPE. If you can work with ACPE or CPSP, fine. If not, in those areas where it's not so, we really need to have our own certifying bodies. I was talking with someone earlier about at least the first unit, if you're on your way to being board certified. At least the first unit could be just with the Islamic community. Then as you decide if you want to go on for other units, having had the CPE experience among Muslims, to then you might be ready for a residency program, say, in a hospital or a nursing home. This is this issue again, I'll talk a little bit later, about the terroristic personality disorder. And maybe I'll talk a little, there are these conditions in the DSM-5 that talks about cultural formation, clinical attention, and cultural formation interview. What's happening with the DSM, it was in the DSM-4, but in the 5, it's more pronounced using this cultural interview. They're saying that if I have a person who has some disorder or presents with the possibility of disorder once I go through the criteria, that in addition to the criteria listed in the DSM-5, let's say for anxiety, I can do this interview, critical reformation interview, and look at the possibility that either their ethnicity or culture or religion may be influencing the disorder. It's not a bad thing to do, I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying that it's all a matter of interpretation. If the person already has the bias, however, if they are truly Rogerian, Carl Rogers, in looking at inside themselves and cleaning themselves out, if they're truly following that, it shouldn't be an issue. If there are these built-in biases, in addition to that, they're doing a cultural interview information, then coming up with a diagnosis, it could be an issue. An issue for that particular, whatever the diagnosis is, and an issue in terms of the pastoral counselor or the psychiatrist or the clinician not really adhering to their professional standards as they say they should. Again, it's a personal call. It depends on adequate supervision at whatever level and some kind of review. And I think that where it comes now when dealing with a Muslim patient, there should be maybe several levels of review before a final diagnosis is enacted. Quranic perspective on a couple of these issues. Whoever removes a worldly grief from a believer, Allah will remove from him one of the griefs on the Day of Judgment. The second one, whoever sees an evil action, let him change it with his hand. If he is not able to do so, then with his tongue. If he or she is not able to do so, then with his heart. So the wellness, one enacting towards others, stopping an injustice, or helping a person who is having some kind of mental or psychological issue, being able to identify it, perhaps with the mental health first aid, being able to make a referral. But seeing something and acting upon it is a Quranic principle. Let's get that one. Adler also, when he talks about that we're always striving towards a goal, this is also Quranic. In the book, I address some of these issues. That there are psychological principles, whether it's Frankl or Jung or Adler, Freud even, that there are principles that they state in their works that right out of the Quran. Sometimes say, oh, he must have been reading Suratul Rahman, so that it's there. So I'm making the connection for the clinician on the psychological principles, and that can be found also in the Quran. The second one here, this one, deals with the people who are chronically misunderstood, who retreat to religion where they proceed to act as they did before. They complain and commiserate with themselves, shifting the burden onto the shoulders of a benevolent God. People who run to religion and use it as a crutch. Adler also talks about these kinds of things. Issues of self-determination, self-identification, and self-development. Some of those are obvious. I won't spend too much time on that. This issue of tribal nations, this comes from Sheikh Diop, Civilization and Barbarism, where he's talking about different kinds of tribes, ethnic tribes that come together to do certain kinds of resources and build their nations on that way. Quran talks about in Surah Hujarat 49, 13th ayat, someone quoted earlier, that Allah created male and female and put people into tribes and nations. Not that they should despise each other, but that they could learn from each other. So that for Muslims, the tribal concept is embedded in the book itself. That's Al-Hujurat 49, chapter 13th verse. Now, specifically for the African American community, Muslim, I'm advising that we have national conferences on African American Muslim self-identity, self-determination, and self-development. Some of this comes from the historical hegemony, historical influence of Muslims coming from other countries, where the African American, having lost a lot of the remnants or the fundamentals of al-Islam have then gravitated towards other cultures, in some ways subsuming them, their African Americanism, into becoming Egyptian, Syrian, Nigerian, Muslim, so that they're losing some of that, what makes them American. Yet, when many of the immigrant Muslims come to the United States, they want to be American, whatever that means to them. There's a hadith that asks, why did you immigrate? Did you immigrate for Allah, His Messenger, or did you immigrate for some worldly good? And it asks the question. So it's not a negative thing against immigration of Muslims. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we always have to ask the intention. Why did you immigrate? And why is it that you come sometimes and take the attitude of the, let's say, oppressor or the dominant culture? I remember even before 9/11 that many of the immigrant Muslims who came to the United States were Republican. And they voted for George Bush at the time when the African American community was working for whoever was running for president at that time. Then after 9/11, of course, when the Muslims in general, and the immigrant Muslim in particular, became the enemy, then it's, what do we do? How do we cope with this? And sometimes they may come to the African American community and say, let's work together. We have the history. We've been here. We know. We know the culture. We know how it works. We understand discrimination and racism, and can add greatly to building a larger ummah that follows the Koran and Hadith without that cultural baggage that many immigrants bring. The other thing is the hypocrisy in certain ways, straight talk, the hypocrisy in certain ways, because especially with the alcohol and drug kinds of issues, the second largest producer, depending on which statistic you're reading, of heroin in the world comes from Afghanistan. Afghanistan. So that when some of the immigrants come, Muslim, and they're not really dealing with the alcohol and drug issues in the community, they face those same issues in Afghanistan or India or Pakistan. So we want to work with them, not in the sense of the denial, but in dealing with those issues. Yes, you understand those issues. Those issues are still here. So let's work together as one community. Some other training ideas are here also. This particular chart talks about the self-identification and development, looking particularly at the African Americans in general, the African American Muslims, Americans in general, and also the Muslim Americans in general. And primarily we're talking about schools for the immigrants. These have been some of the major things they've focused on. And sometimes they're very insular, and it's not necessarily a criticism, because I said earlier that a lot divided us into tribes. So it's you work on your own community, whether you're Bangladeshi, that's fine. But however, then you work with the Pakistani, you work with the African Americans, you work with the Syrians to help build whatever, bring all those resources together to build one solid ummah. So this is what this one is about. Earlier, I think one of the brothers, African, who made a presentation was talking about the issue of, I think it's the brother here, he was talking about the children and the issue of economics in Nigeria. And basically he was saying that until they deal with this physiological issue, according to Maslow, and find issues of safety, then belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization, getting all of their needs together, again, at this level, with the food and the issues that they need, they can't really achieve self-actualization. Well, we're having the same issue with the Muslim community, African American, and the immigrant. Now I'm going to stop saying immigrant. I'm just going to say African American Muslim community. You got the point. So, we can't. Allah's the best knower, but we can't do. we should work towards building a community, a Muslim community, that addresses all of these issues in America. This one I said particularly for the African American community. It does talk about the physiological, food, breathing water, and legal sex. Once these things in our own communities, housing, masjid, businesses for safety, friends and family belonging for the intimacy, self-esteem, knowledge of self, history and heritage. The African American community has a history of enslavement in the United States and an Islamic heritage. And I'm making the difference between history and heritage. That's my point. Okay, thank you. Again, the African American Muslims in the antebellum meaning before the war, Revolutionary War, 2 Timothy, right? Fought the good fight. There were manuscripts, again, in Savannah, Georgia, I spoke that early, as testimonies of certain white people who talked about how the Muslims were practicing al-Islam here in the United States during that period, and the reference in Dr. Austin's book. Message songs. How many of you familiar hands are familiar with Let Us Very Pray Together on Our Knees? Have you ever really listened to the refrain? When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me. See, for Muslims, especially African American Muslim, who understands the enslavement issues, that where the religion was taken from us, was bred out, whatever language you want to use, there were message songs, and we know that from other issues when the Africans or the African Americans, whether they're Muslim or not, were escaping to the north. They would say, there's a meeting here tonight, meaning that we're going to meet over here to plan how to escape. Deep River, my home is over Jordan. Jordan being the Lake Erie or someplace in Canada. So we had these message songs. So I'm saying too that we had this, give me that old time religion. It's good for Paul and Silas. It was good for, give me the old time religion. These, I think, are some of the message songs where the Africans, including the Muslims, were saying, we're looking for our traditional religions. Give me the old time religion. Again, and let us beg brother. When I fall on my knees, making the morning prayer, oh Lord, have mercy on me. So we have those kinds of issues. I'm so glad trouble doesn't last always. We have that in the Ma'usud Yusuf. After hardship, there's ease. And this was one of the African American Negro spirituals. Human devils. Sometimes we really don't want to see the devil as a human being. We want it to be some kind of entity. But there's also, and the Koran talks about the devils of mankind. There are people who are just evil. Whether the Creator has created them that way or not, that's for the Creator to tell us, inform us. But there are people who just do evil. And there are some people who, our tradition says, there are people who behave like the people of paradise. And then what was written for them overtakes him or her. And so he or she behaves like the people of the hellfire, and then they enter it. And the religion also says that there are people who are destined for the paradise. So they look like they belong in the hellfire. And then they end up going to paradise. There are people who look like they're going to paradise, and they end up in the hellfire. I have no, that's Allah's Lord, His creation, for some greater understanding that is beyond mine. I just know, observe that that's the behavior. People like to beat up on Freud in terms of religion. Oh, he was anti-religion. Well, I think Freud had something to say. It was slightly different. I'm not saying that he wasn't anti-religion. I'm just saying, like, I just wanted to say what he said. Religion has clearly performed great service for civilization. It has contributed much towards the taming of asocial instincts, but not enough. It has ruled human society for many thousands of years and has had time to show what it can achieve. If it has succeeded in making the majority of mankind happy and comforting him and reconciling them to life and making them into vehicles of civilization, no one would attempt to alter the existing conditions. So we, the religious people, I don't want to say out to blame, we have work to do to make Freud a liar. He made an observation, and from that I guess he had some other kinds of things to say about religion. And then go over to some more. This is the thing about terrorism. People shouldn't have to suffer. They shouldn't be abused. Whatever their condition, they shouldn't be abused. And again, changing it with your heart in your hand. Maslow is brilliant, one of my favorite psychotherapists. No, we did that one. Persecution in the Koran, the Koran says that persecution is worse than slaughter. Could we hear that one more time? Persecution is worse than slaughter. Doesn't take too much to go to the next step on that. People who are persecuted can develop more neurosis, psychosis, those kinds of issues because of the persecution context. So that sometimes they would wish for death to avoid the persecution. Well, that's what Shakespeare said. A coward dies 1,000 times before his death, from Julius Caesar. The valiant never tasted death but once, the valiant. Of all the wonders that I have yet heard, it seems to me most strange that men should seeing death that is necessary evil will come to its end, will come when it comes. You got it. Persecution is worse than evil. And also, Maslow says again that a person who does not rebel against oppression is also sick. That in not rebelling against oppression is sick. How you do it, social context, is something else. I'm going to move. This is, again, the formation thing about from the DSM-5 that we need to be aware of. It does talk about the cultural formation and what that means, and the 16 questions, cultural concepts of distress. And Christians also should be concerned because when the psychiatrist could also say it's Christianity or a particular brand or kind of Christianity that's making you crazy, and put that into the diagnosis. So it's a general concept, and I'm just talking particularly from the Muslim perspective. And why is this an issue? Again, as an African American, we understand how the psychiatrists and the mental health community can use certain things against us. There was this thing with Benjamin Rush, the signer of the Declaration of Independence, dean of the medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, who described Negroes as suffering from an affliction called negritude, which was thought to be a mild form of leprosy, and the only cure for the disorder was to become white. Enough said. And again, some other examples. There was this disease called drapetomania, part of the psychological techniques at the time during enslavement. It caused Negroes to run away from service. It is a disease of the mind as any other species of mental alienation. And this other one says that Negroes were insensible they had an insensibility to pain, and you should just beat them. My point is that just as I'm concerned about the DSM-5 in terms of this potential for terroristic disorder, and that using this and saying that religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam, is something that can be used against somebody for mental health. We have history in this country. I'm not an alarmist so much, I'm just going by what the evidence suggests. We have history in this country that we need to be careful, at least, on some of these issues. That's all I have for you. I thank you for your patience. I hope I didn't impress you too much. I did want to get some of these things out. So do we have time for? Good. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm a little bit concerned about that idea of the terrorist profile.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have some thoughts here. It needs, if it's going to happen, it needs to transcend race or religion
Yes.
or culture. Or it will be defined politically.
Yes.
Because we have white terrorism and we have terrorism from everywhere.
Yes.
It's like Foucault who said, who defines what insanity is?
Yes.
Who says it's the dominant culture that
Exactly.
defines it? So what happens? I mean, this is concerning me. Because once they define it, how do you get out of it? How do you change it?
I'll take another question and I'll address the, you had a question, Doctor?
Yes, precisely. In fact, thank you, sister, because it was the question I was going to raise.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is alarming, and the conditions which justify those, for example, the case of the psychiatrist who decided
Mm-hmm.
that people who wanted to seek freedom
Yes.
from enslavement had a disease.
Yes.
Well, much of the conditions which allow for that kind of thinking are present with us today.
Yes.
And therefore, it is really alarming. And one of the areas in which we, as religious leaders, and I am including me, have failed is indeed to appreciate what it really means when we talk about diversity. And we are good at giving lip service to it. But we really need to examine our own assumptions when we are engaged with others who don't look like us, who don't speak the same language we do, whose belief systems are different from ours, and many of whom, for those reasons, we find challenging or threatening. How do we handle that?
Thank you. We'll go to scripture. We'll go to Romans 8:28. All things come together for good for those who love the Lord. So with all the stuff that is happening and knowing that we don't have control and that there is a higher power that we can petition to address these things, we're only responsible for doing the good that we can do. Being aware of what the issues are, working together as individuals, as groups, clans, tribes, nations, for the good. That's what we're responsible for. I think when most of us believe in the Day of Judgment, that on the Day of Judgment we'll be asked, what did you do? And did you do the best that you could? And be rewarded or punished? We believe in that accordingly. So we're only asked, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a warner ahead of the Day of Judgment, the Prophet, and came. And the Koran says in certain parts, look, stay in your lane. You're a prophet, deliver the message. Let me be concerned about whatever happens. So I'm suggesting that as people of faith, and this is the positive side, I'll give you all that, I'll give you the positive side. The positive side is that working together, the pastoral care, places like Graduate Theological Foundation, networking among ourselves, we can do a wellness movement. I'm suggesting one particularly for the African American community, wellness, and for the Muslim community, but wellness. And promoting wellness and really working together to do that. Looking at this DSM-5, I think we need to get a think tank, a religious think tank, maybe not just Muslim, but a think tank where people are really looking at the possible influence that this could have and begin to have our own definition. See, that's the self, I didn't spend too much time on that, the self-affirmation, where we determine individually or determine within our traditions, we determine who we are. And we're not mad at anybody else, but we determine who we are. And we can work in groups, larger groups, however you want to define them, for the common good. I saw a hand. Yes, ma'am.
Because you presented such a rich depth of information in your presentation, I'm hoping that the GTF will make the slides available.
Yes.
Because
Okay.
different references will mean something and will spark something for a variety of people in this room. And to be able to have that available would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Along that same line,
Mm-hmm.
are you somehow suggesting that the Muslim community has in some ways secluded itself as well as it has been excluded from the larger society and thus from a healing environment? And if so, what are some possible acts of healing this divide?
Healing. I'm suggesting that the Islamic community is still in a phase of development here in the United States. That we need another 50 years to really consolidate and bring things together. It's generational. It's generational. I'd say that the second generation of Muslims who've come, the immigrant community, first generation, the communities come, then they have a generation, then they have another generation. A couple things can happen. The second generation, I'm observing, this is empirical, the second generation make two choices. Either they see that, oh, okay, that's what they did in the old country. Now I'm an American that has a two-edged sword. I'm an American, so I'm going to go out and do the drugs. Or I'm an American, I'm going to join on to a system for good. I'm become an activist. I'm going to work for prison reform, for the homeless, for food insufficiency. So they see the Koran as and we have to remember Dr. James Cone, who just died recently, and the concept of liberation theology. Many of us see Islam as liberation theology. So that if we, I got, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
What would we do to, what possible acts can be performed that would heal the divide?
See, it's,
Because I think
I got you.
say
I got you.
The Muslim community, in many ways, has secluded itself.
I think that for maybe for a little while longer, it may have to seclude itself in certain ways so that it can heal. Because it's not the divide necessarily that will be healing, it's the healing, the dynamic of healing. So as individuals heal in the Muslim community, as they heal in the non-Muslim community, the Hindu community, the Buddhist community, and we come together in an ecumenical kind of setting. Like this is an example. Even we're having this conversation now. He's a Muslim making the presentation before various Christians and different denominations and Muslims from various countries. This is part of it. This is the healing and sharing this information. I'm pouring out my soul in our community and what's happening, and I'm receiving the love back from you, from people here at GTF. This is what makes it work, and this is what has to happen. And this is a forum for that kind of discussion. Somebody else, I heard you already. Anybody else? We'll come back to you if not.
Okay.
Okay, nobody.
Well, I'm following on the theme that was presented in the question. And I think that what we ought not to miss is the opportunity for religious leaders who are not Muslim to also begin playing a role, recognizing that the totality of religion and religious leaders in the country can work together in a way that we have not been doing, even as we continue to heal.
in this country, economics seems to be important. And when I showed the slide on how tribal nations form, sometimes it's around economics. So when you have competing interests, competing tribal interests, see, that's what happens when, even in the community like New York City, even after 9/11, there was all this money that was available for disaster relief. And that was wonderful. The federal government was providing it. So it went to what was that thing called? It was some interfaith organization, Council of Churches for the City of New York, initially. I think they got some of the funds. Then they said, well, we can't go to the council, so they had to form some other kind of agency to accept the funds. Well, of course, the United Methodists already had some disaster kinds of things underway. The Islamic Circle of North America had some vans and things. They were doing some things for getting food. So it became a conflict of, okay, whoever is ready for the funds, then they get it. So then we got to this whole economic thing. Well, the Jews need some. Well, okay, we have Muslims, we need some too. And then the Christians had the majority of it. So the coalition, in a sense, sort of fell. When it gets to that money thing, for the love of money, not the money, for the love of money is the root of all evil. So and I'm not saying that somebody has to make a decision on how to divide the resources, but I think that's a collective decision. And that's where the honesty comes together. We all have needs and working as groups, and we see it a lot in New York City. We all have needs for our community. There's only a certain amount of money. How do we do that? I don't know what the answer is. I'm just saying that people of good faith and goodwill have to bring that good faith and goodwill to the board and to the table to do that. There's no real answer. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that what life is all about? Isn't that the challenge of the Koran says that the competition is in the doing of good. That's the only competition that really matters. Competition in the doing of good. So I'm going to compete with you to see if I can do more good than you can do. That's the bottom line. Any more questions before we end? Oh, one more here.
You said something when you first started out about the CPE setting.
Yes.
In what ways can Christians be more responsive to the needs of Muslims, either in CPE training or even in clinical settings?
Abide by the guidelines of CPE. It's already there in the charter for any of the groups, ACPE, CPSP. It's already there. The healthcare chapter. It's already there in the covenant, because all of them have covenants. And in the covenant, if we really live up to the covenant of those organizations, we wouldn't really have an issue. And also read plenty of Rogers. How to get out of the way so that you can deal with the other. Get yourself out of the way. And that's what CPE is supposed to be about. That's why there's such a contradiction. And that's why I say in many ways, and there are people who are good people. I'm not trying to badmouth those organizations. There's some really good, dedicated people in all of those organizations, and who have done wonderful things and contributed to the Islamic community and contributed to the training. I had training. I'm board certified, CPSP. I had excellent training. I had some background. Some of the stuff just went over my head. And then there's certain stuff that came to me and I said, you need to take that nonsense someplace else. I'm not the one. So I could deal with that. But there's other people who couldn't. So there's some good people there. I don't want to say there's hope. I say there's prayer, and there's whatever the Creator has planned for us. And again, Romans 8:28, all things come together for good with those who love the Lord and are appointed in His way. And with that, I say thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hatim.